The dinner table was set with care. Good placemats, cloth napkins folded just so. My son sat across from me, smiling like a man who had already won. "Mom, I have some good news." He set his phone on the table screen facing up. "I added my wife to Dad's investment account. 450,000, she has full access now." She set down her fork. One slow breath. I picked up my tea. "Funny thing about that account, son." I looked at him steadily. "I liquidated everything last month. There's exactly $32 left." The smile left his face completely, and they would never see what was coming next. Before we go further, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, city, country? I read them all. Subscribe to Wise Revenge and stay with me. Some elements are fictional, added for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, the message is not. The pot roast had been in the oven since 2 in the afternoon. I could smell it from the garage, that low, patient smell of meat and rosemary that had filled this house every Sunday for as long as any of us could remember. Cora had set the good placemats, the cream-colored ones with the stitched border, and there were actual cloth napkins folded into triangles beside each plate. She only did the napkins when she wanted the evening to feel deliberate. When I came in from checking the furnace and saw those napkins, I already knew what kind of Sunday this was going to be. Julian and Sabrina came downstairs together at 6:15, which was unusual. Julian normally drifted in whenever the food smell reached his room, unhurried as smoke. Tonight he was wearing a shirt I had never seen before, dark blue, some kind of fabric that caught the light when he moved, the kind of shirt that costs more than I used to make in a week. He had his phone in his hand, which was not unusual, but he was holding it differently. Purposefully. The way a man holds something he intends to use. Sabrina wore a smile I had come to recognize over 3 years of Sunday dinners. Warm on the surface, busy underneath. She kissed Cora on the cheek and said the pot roast smelled incredible, which it did, and took her seat at the table with her hands folded like a woman waiting for a ceremony to begin. We ate for a while. Cora asked about the weather. I talked about the furnace filter. Julian ate more than usual, which meant he was nervous, and nervous Julian always ate. Sabrina touched her food without committing to it. I watched all of this from my end of the table, the way I used to watch pressure gauges at the plant, not staring, just tracking. Then Julian set down his fork, picked up his phone, and cleared his throat. "I have some good news," he said. "For the whole family." Cora reached for the bread without looking up. Julian turned his phone toward me. There was a brokerage firm's website on the screen, an account summary page, though the numbers were blurred from where I sat. "I've been working on something for a few weeks," he said. "Getting everything set up, making sure it was done right." He paused for effect, the way he used to pause before the punchline of a joke when he was 12. "Mom, I have to tell you something." Julian set his phone on the table screen facing up. "I've been working on this for a few weeks, getting everything in order." He paused the way he used to pause before a punchline when he was 12. "I got Sabrina added to Dad's investment account as an authorized contact, so she can help manage things going forward, help you both, really. It just makes sense now that we're all living here together." Cora set down her fork. Sabrina's smile widened by exactly the right amount. I picked up my tea. Sabrina's smile widened by exactly the right amount. I picked up my tea. It was the last cup Cora had poured before dinner, and it had gone slightly cool, and I drank from it the way I had drunk from 1,000 work thermoses in the cold, outside the plant, on winter mornings, when the news was never good, and the only thing to do was finish your coffee and get on with it. I said. Julian leaned forward. "The account, the 450. Sabrina's been reading up on portfolio management and she has some ideas about reallocation. We thought instead of it just sitting there. Funny thing about that account, I said. He stopped. I set the cup down. Why don't you pull up the balance? I said. The actual balance. Call the 800 number on the back of your statement. Let them tell you what's in there. Julian looked at me. Then he looked at Sabrina. Something flickered between them, quick and private, and then Julian unlocked his phone with the slow confidence of a man who believes he already knows the answer to the question he's about to ask. He dialed. We all heard the automated system pick up that flat, pleasant voice that financial institutions use when they want you to feel reassured by a recording. Julian entered the account number, entered the last 4 digits of my social security number, which he had apparently obtained somewhere somehow, a detail I noted, and set aside. He pressed the key for current balance. The automated voice read the number. Julian's jaw went tight. His left hand pressed flat against the table, and I could see his knuckles pale where they made contact with the wood. "I'm sorry," he said into the phone, his voice climbing a register. "Can you repeat that?" The voice repeated it. $32.00. Julian lowered the phone. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has just stepped onto a staircase, expecting one more step, and found the floor instead. His neck had gone red above that expensive collar. Across the table, Sabrina's folded hands tightened against each other, the knuckles white and sharp, and for the first time that evening, her smile had gone entirely somewhere else. "There's a mistake," Julian said. His voice was rough, now scraped thin. "Someone made an error." Dad, did something happen to the account? Did someone get into it? We need to call Karen. Nobody got into anything, son. I said it the way I used to say it on the plant floor when a junior tech was convinced the machine was broken, and the machine was not broken. Level, final, not unkind, but not soft either. Then what? He stopped, pressed his hand harder against the table until I could hear the wood creak faintly under his palm. That was $450,000. It didn't just anything, I said. It went exactly where I decided it should go. The table was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street, its headlights moving slowly across the far wall of the dining room, and then the room went dim again. Cora had not stopped eating. She cut a small piece of pot roast, brought it to her mouth, set her fork down. She had not looked up once. Julian pushed back from the table. His chair scraped against the floor tile. He was breathing through his nose, fast and shallow, the way a man breathes when he is trying to hold something in that wants very badly to come out. $32, he said. Not a question. His voice broke on the last word, and he pulled it back together with visible effort, jaw working. $32 is what's left. That's right, $32. He said it again, quieter this time, like he was trying to find the way the number made sense. He looked at Sabrina. Sabrina looked at the table. He looked at Cora. Cora reached for her water glass. Then he looked at me. Dad. The word came out, scraped hollow. What did you do? I folded my hands on the table. The same hands that had carried a lunch pail into a factory every morning for 30 years. The same hands that had signed his school permission slips and co-signed his first car loan and written a check for $22,000 so he and Sabrina could have the wedding reception Sabrina had wanted at a venue in Midtown. $32, I said. One for every year I carried you. Sit down, Julian. I'm going to explain exactly what that number means. You want to know who I am before you understand what I did. Fair enough. A man doesn't empty a 30-year investment account on a whim. And if you're sitting at my table thinking I lost my mind, or got swindled, or finally cracked under the weight of a queen's property tax bill, then you don't know me. So let me fix that. I started at Kellerman Industrial in the spring of 1993. I was 28 years old, newly married to Cora, and we had just signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment on a 174th Street that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes, no matter how many times we painted over the walls. I had $240 in my checking account and a toolbox my father had given me when I graduated trade school. The toolbox was better than the checking account. It has held its value considerably longer. Kellerman made components for commercial HVAC systems, large-scale industrial work, the kind of machinery that heats and cools buildings you walk through every day without thinking about hospitals and office towers and airport terminals. My job was to keep the production line running. When a press seized, or a conveyor belt jumped its track, or a hydraulic coupling failed at 2 in the morning, I was the man they called. Not because I was the smartest person in the building, because I was the one who stayed. I want you to understand what 30 years on a plant floor actually means in the body. It means your lower back starts talking to you around year 15 and never stops. It means you know the smell of overheated metal the way a baker knows the smell of bread, not as information, but as instinct. It means you own enough pairs of work gloves that your wife stops buying them as birthday presents because there are simply too many in the house. And then one year she stops buying them, and you realize that was the year she understood the gloves were not a hobby. They were the job. My neighbor Dennis Pruitt, who fixed cars for 30 years before his knees gave out, used to say that a man's hands tell you everything about how he spent his life. Dennis would know. The man's palms looked like topographical maps. Mine were heading in the same direction by the time I was 45, and by 50 they had arrived. Julian had soft hands. I noticed this at his wedding when we shook hands for the photographer, that formal grip fathers and sons do in front of cameras at weddings. His palm was smooth. I held on a half-second longer than necessary, the way you hold a machine part to check for wear, and I thought not with judgment, just with the particular clarity of a man who measures things for a living. He has never worked with his hands. Not once. Not in a way that left a mark. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so the number makes sense. Because here is what 30 years at Kellerman also meant. It meant a paycheck every 2 weeks that I treated with the seriousness of a contract. Cora and I had one credit card, which we paid in full every month without exception. We drove cars until the repair bills exceeded the car's value, at which point we sold the car and bought another used one. We did not take vacations that required flights until Julian was 12 years old, and when we did, I researched airfare for 6 weeks beforehand. I am aware this is not glamorous. It was not designed to be glamorous. It was designed to work. When Cora's mother Martha passed in 2008 and left us $15,000 from her life insurance policy, I sat with that money for 3 weeks before I touched it. Cora said to do something real with it, something Martha would have wanted to matter. I called a financial advisor named Karen Solis, whose office was on Jamaica Avenue and who had a rubber plant by the window that she had kept alive for 11 years. I figured if she could keep a plant alive for 11 years in a Queen's office, she could probably manage an index fund. Karen set up a diversified portfolio, broad market index funds, low fees, automatic reinvestment of dividends. Nothing complicated, nothing exciting. The investing equivalent of showing up every day and doing the work. I added to it consistently, first $500 a month, then $800 when I made senior technician, then $1,200 after the 2015 renegotiation that finally gave the maintenance crew the raise we had been asking for since 2011. I did not touch it during the 2008 crash, though it lost 31% of its value in 14 months. and watching it was something I can only compare to watching a machine fail in slow motion, when you know you cannot reach the shutoff in time. I did not touch it. I let it recover. It recovered. In 2023, my back finally made a decision my pride had been postponing for 2 years. The orthopedic surgeon at NYU Langone told me I had the lumbar spine of a man who had spent 3 decades lifting and bending in ways the human skeleton was not engineered to sustain. She said I could continue working if I accepted significant limitations on what I could lift and how long I could stand, which in practical terms meant I could not do my job. I retired at 58, 2 years ahead of schedule. By then, the account Karen had been tending for 15 years had grown to $450,000. Not because I was clever, not because I got lucky with a stock pick or inherited wealth or had a season where everything went right. Because I started with $15,000 that a woman named Martha had saved one careful dollar at a time, and I treated it the way I treated everything that came through my hands. With patience, with consistency, with the understanding that a thing maintained properly will outlast almost anything you can throw at it. Julian sat across from me at that dinner table with his new shirt and his smooth hands and his phone showing a balance of $32, and I watched him try to find the version of this story where he was wronged. I understood the impulse. I had been his age once. I had also been wrong once. You need to understand something before I say another word, I told him. That account was never the family's money. It was never a fund you were waiting to inherit. It was the product of a specific life lived a specific way over a specific number of years. I placed both hands flat on the table, and the number of years was 32. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights dragging across the ceiling. Cora refilled her water glass. Sabrina had not moved in 4 minutes, and somewhere in the house the furnace clicked on that steady, reliable knock of a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. But that money didn't start with me, I said. It started with a woman named Martha. And the night she died, your mother sat in our kitchen and handed me something I had no business deserving. Martha ironed everything. Bed sheets, dish towels, the collars of shirts that were only going to be worn around the house. She ironed with the focused expression of a woman who believed that if a thing was worth doing, it was worth doing until the wrinkles were gone. I used to watch her from the doorway of her kitchen in Woodside and think that this was a woman who had made peace with the world entirely on her own terms. She saved cash her whole life, not in any account in envelopes. Labeled envelopes filed in a shoebox under her bed, each one marked in her careful handwriting, Electric Groceries, Dr. Church. She did not trust banks the way her generation often did not trust banks, with a wariness that had been earned rather than inherited. When she finally opened a savings account in 1991, she did it because Cora asked her to, and she did it the way she did everything Cora asked completely, and without making Cora feel she had asked for too much. She died in October of 2008, 2 weeks after her 71st birthday, of a heart attack that her doctor said was fast. I choose to believe that. The life insurance policy paid out $15,000. Cora was the sole beneficiary. I remember sitting at our kitchen table the night the check arrived, the two of us looking at it under the overhead light, and Cora's eyes were red, and her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea she had stopped drinking an hour ago. She slid the check across the table toward me without a word. Then she found her voice. "Please do something real with it," she said. "Something that lasts. Mom would want it to matter." I held that check for a long time. It was the most money we had ever had in one place. It was also the saddest money I had ever touched, and I wanted to be sure those two facts did not cancel each other out. 3 weeks later, I walked into Karen Solis's office on Jamaica Avenue and told her I had $15,000 and a dead mother-in-law, and I wanted to do something she would have been proud of. Karen did not blink. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. That was the beginning. Back at the dinner table, Julian was gripping the edge of the tablecloth with his right hand. Not dramatically, just holding on, the way a person holds something when they need something solid and there is nothing else available. Sabrina had her arms crossed, now her shoulders pulled inward, recalculating behind her eyes. I could see it happening. I had watched enough pressure systems build and shift at the plant to recognize the pattern. The $15,000 that your grandmother left became $450,000, I said. Not because of any genius on my part, because I left it alone and kept adding to it, and did not panic when the market dropped, which it did multiple times, and did not celebrate when it climbed, which it also did. 15 years of showing up and not doing anything stupid. Julian opened his mouth. I know what you're going to say, Humble, I told him. You're going to say it was sitting there, that it wasn't being used, that it might as well have been working for the family instead of just sitting in an account collecting statements. I picked up my fork, set it back down. I've heard that argument before. Your mother used to make it gently when you were in college and we were paying tuition. She stopped making it when she understood that the account was not a backup plan. It was the plan. Cora, who had been quiet through all of this, reached for the bread basket and set it closer to Julian's plate. It was the kind of gesture she made when she wanted someone to feel taken care of without making a production of it. Julian did not take any bread. Then her phone buzzed on the counter behind her. She glanced back at it. A small softening moved across her face, barely visible, the kind of expression that only 26 years of marriage trains you to read. She reached over, turned the phone face down, and turned back to the table. Who is it? I asked. Willa, Cora said. She calls every Sunday. I'll call her back. Julian said nothing. He did not ask how his sister was doing. He did not ask what Willa wanted. He looked at the tablecloth and kept his hand on its edge, and I noted this the way I noted everything that evening, quietly, without comment, filing it away. Willa called every Sunday without fail. She taught at a preschool 12 minutes from this house and paid her own rent in a one-bedroom apartment in Jackson Heights, and never once in 24 years had asked Cora and me for anything beyond the occasional Sunday dinner. The last time I had seen her hands, they were marked with green paint from an art project she had been running with her 4-year-olds. She had not noticed until I pointed it out. She laughed and said the kids had been working on frogs. I thought about that for a moment. Green paint and paper frogs. Then I looked at Julian. Shook that account, I said, started with a woman who ironed dish towels and saved cash in labeled envelopes and trusted your mother with every dollar she had. It was built on 30 years of lunches I did not buy, and vacations I did not take, and a back that is never going to fully recover from what I asked of it. My voice stayed even. I had practiced staying even for a long time. Your grandmother's money, my labor, your mother's trust. That is what $450,000 is made of, Julian. That is what you were planning to redirect. The furnace knocked once below us, steady and reliable, doing the job it was designed for. Now let me tell you about the boy I raised, I said. Because somewhere between Martha's $15,000 and tonight I lost track of where my son went. Julian was the kind of kid who always had his hand out. Not mean about it. Not demanding in any way that would have made it easy to say no. Just open. Palm up, expectant, with the mild confidence of a person who has never once reached for something and found nothing there. I want to be fair. That is my job, fairness. I spent 30 years calibrating instruments that had to read true regardless of what you wanted the number to be. So let me read this one true. Julian was not a bad child. He was bright enough, sociable, easy to like. He made friends without it, and lost them the same way, drifting between circles with a kind of frictionless charm that I used to think was a gift, and later understood was a symptom. He did not know how to stay with anything that became difficult. Not a job, not a friendship, not an apartment. He was 17 when I bought him the Honda Civic, a 2010 model used with 82,000 miles on it, and a small dent above the rear left wheel, that I negotiated the seller down $400 for. Julian had failed his driver's test twice by then, and when he failed it a third time, I drove him home from the DMV in Rego Park without saying anything about it, and 3 weeks later I handed him the keys to the Civic. He said thanks and asked if I could put him on my insurance. I put him on my insurance. When he lost his first real job in 2019, a sales position at a software company in Midtown that he had held for 14 months, he called me from the parking garage where he had gone to avoid crying in the office. I could hear him trying to keep his voice level. I told him to come home for dinner. I paid his rent in Astoria for 3 months without telling Cora, which I am not proud of, not because I paid it, but because I did not tell her. Cora would have agreed. I just did not want to have the conversation about why Julian could not cover 3 months on his own. He met Sabrina in the fall of 2020 at a rooftop event in Long Island City that his friend group had rented for someone's birthday. She was working in social media marketing at the time and had 40,000 Instagram followers and a very clear idea of the life she intended to live. I do not say this to be uncharitable. She was direct about her ambitions in a way I actually respected early on. Directness is something I understand. What I did not understand at first was that the life Sabrina intended to live required a funding source she had not yet identified. They married in September 2021 at a venue in Midtown Manhattan that held 200 guests and had a rooftop terrace with a view of the Hudson. The catering alone cost more than my first car. Cora and I paid $22,000 toward the wedding, which Sabrina thanked us for with a card that had a gold foil border and the words "Eternally Grateful" printed in script. Julian thanked us by hugging me in the parking garage afterward, briefly the way men hug when they are not sure how long it should last. By 2022, they had leased an apartment in Astoria, 2 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet at a monthly rent that required both their incomes and left no margin. Sabrina filled it with furniture from a store in Soho and documented everything on Instagram. Julian bought a treadmill that lived in the second bedroom and was used 4 times. 8 months later, the credit card statements started arriving that told a different story than the Instagram posts. Sabrina had been carrying a balance that rolled forward each month, growing the way an untended problem grows quietly, then suddenly. By the time they sat down and looked at the actual numbers, the combined credit card debt had reached $28,000. They gave up the Astoria apartment in November of 2022, came back to Queens. Cora made up the guest room and did not say anything that could be interpreted as a question. I moved my filing cabinet to the back of the closet, which was not a decision I announced. At the dinner table, Julian released the tablecloth and picked up his fork. He moved a piece of potato around his plate without eating it. Sabrina had uncrossed her arms, but her shoulders were still drawn in still defensive, a posture that reminded me of a pressure relief valve that has been closed too long and is beginning to show it in the fittings. "You're making it sound like I've never done anything," Julian said. His voice had dropped from the raw edge of 20 minutes ago into something lower and more controlled, which I recognized as more dangerous. Quieter anger is always more dangerous. "I work. I have always worked." "You have," I said. That was true. Julian held jobs. He simply spent more than he earned and expected the difference to be someone else's problem. "Then why does it feel like you're putting me on trial?" "I'm not putting you on trial," I said. I'm giving you the invoice. There's a difference. He looked at me, his jaw tightened, and his fork pressed down against the plate hard enough that the ceramic made a sound, a small, sharp click that Cora heard, because I saw her eyes move toward his hand. The day Sabrina moved her second suitcase into our house, I said I counted the locks on my filing cabinet. I'm not proud of that. But I'm not ashamed of it either. Sabrina's chin came up. Her eyes were sharp and direct, and she started to say something, then made the decision not to. I watched her make that decision. It was the most intelligent thing she had done all evening. I should have said something then, I said. Cora did. She just waited until she had proof before she said a word. Cora always does. My wife has the quietest anger of any person I have ever known. When Cora is furious, she folds laundry. She stands at the ironing board, the way her mother Martha used to stand at it, with that same focused stillness, pressing seams flat with a patience that has nothing peaceful about it if you know what you are looking at. I have learned over 26 years to read the difference between Cora folding laundry because she is folding laundry and Cora folding laundry because something has happened that she has not yet decided how to handle. On a Wednesday evening in October, I came home from my afternoon walk to find every shirt I owned hanging freshly pressed in the closet. That was how I knew. She was in the kitchen when I found her standing at the counter with a cup of tea she had not touched, staring at the window above the sink the way a person stares at something that is not actually outside the glass. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down and waited. With Cora, waiting is always the right move. She turned around. Her eyes were dry, which meant she had already moved past the part where she might have cried and arrived at the part where she was ready to act. I went into your office to get the scissors, she said. The good ones for the wrapping paper. I was going to wrap Willa's birthday gift. She set the cup down on the counter. Julian was standing at your filing cabinet with the top drawer open. He had a folder in his hand, the blue one, the investment statements. Sabrina was next to him with her phone out, taking pictures of the pages. Her voice did not shake. It was very level, the way a surface is level when someone has taken great care to make it so. They had their backs to the door. They did not hear me come in. I kept my hands flat on the table. How many pages? I asked. She photographed everything in this folder, Cora said. I counted. 12 pages. How long were you standing there? Long enough. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She folded her hands on the table in front of her, and her knuckles were pale against each other, pressed tight, the only visible sign of what this had cost her to hold together. Gideon, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. Sell everything, she said. Whatever is in that account, sell it. Move it. Do whatever Karen says needs to be done, but do it before our son does something that none of us can take back. I looked at my wife for a long moment. The overhead light in our kitchen has always been slightly too bright, the kind of light that shows everything without mercy. And in that light, I could see exactly what this evening had cost her. The small tightness around her eyes, the way she was breathing careful and measured like a person managing pain. You're sure about what you saw? I said. Not a question. I took a picture of them, Cora said. On my phone, before I walked away. She slid her phone across the table. There it was. Julian's back, Sabrina's arm extended, the blue folder open, 12 pages of my financial life spread out under the lamp I had bought at a hardware store on Jamaica Avenue 11 years ago. My chest tightened in a way I had learned to recognize, not fear, not anger, but the specific sensation of something I had built being put at risk by factors I had not engineered for. I had felt it twice before at the plant, both times, right before a significant mechanical failure. Both times I had been right. There is something else, Cora said. She reached past her phone and turned the shared laptop on the kitchen counter toward me. The browser history was open. 12 searches over the past 3 weeks, all from the same afternoon sessions when I took my walks. How to add authorized user to brokerage account. Can a family member access investment account without consent? Power of attorney financial accounts, New York. Brokerage account joint access requirements. Sabrina had been thorough. I gave her that. She has been researching this for weeks, Cora said. She knows what she is looking for. She just does not know that the answer to every one of those questions requires your signature. Not mine, not Julian's, yours. She closed the laptop. She does not know that yet. I stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the street. A neighbor's porch light was on. A car I did not recognize was parked in front of the house 2 doors down. October in Queens looks like October everywhere, leaves going brown at the edges, the particular cold that does not commit to being cold yet, but reminds you it is coming. Before I call Karen, I said, there is something I want to do first. Cora looked at me. So I want them to think they have already won, I said. I want them comfortable. I want Sabrina to stop looking and start waiting because people who are waiting stop paying attention. I turned away from the window. That was your idea, actually. You just haven't said it yet. Cora looked at me for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. The shape of a woman who married an engineer and has spent 26 years watching him solve problems from the inside out. Sabrina is going to ask me, Cora said. She has been building up to it. I can feel it. When she does, I said, tell her yes. Cora reached across the table and picked up her tea. It was cold by now, but she drank it anyway steadily to the bottom of the cup. I'll make it convincing, she said. You always do, I told her. In industrial maintenance, there is a technique called a controlled failure. The principle is straightforward. If you know a component is going to break, you make it break on your terms in a safe environment before it can fail somewhere. It will do real damage. You control the conditions. You control the timing. You walk away with the machine intact and the problem solved, and nobody on the floor gets hurt. I had spent 30 years running controlled failures on equipment worth more than most people's houses. It was without question the skill I was most grateful for. On the Saturday morning, Sabrina sat down across from my wife at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her most considerate smile. I was in the garage when it happened. I heard their voices through the door, Cora's measured and warm, Sabrina's carefully modulated, to match it the way a person modulates their voice when they are performing a version of themselves they have rehearsed. I did not go in. I picked up a wrench I did not need and turned it over in my hands and listened. I've been thinking, Sabrina said, about how much you and Gideon do for this family. How hard you've both worked. Julian talks about it all the time, actually. How much he respects what his dad built. A pause, the length of a breath calculated to feel sincere. We want to help carry some of that going forward. Be real partners. Not just, just living here. That's thoughtful, Cora said. We were thinking, and tell me if this is too much, but if Gideon added me to the investment account as an authorized contact, I could help manage it. Track the statements, liaise with the advisor. Free you both up. Another pause. Julian feels terrible that he hasn't been more involved. This would be his way of stepping up. I heard Cora set her mug down on the counter. Let me talk to Gideon, Cora said. He handles all of that. But I think he'd be open to it. That evening, Cora told me every word. We stood in the kitchen after dinner, and she recited the conversation with the precision of a woman who had listened to every syllable with the awareness that she would need to repeat it later. When she finished, I nodded. "Call her tomorrow," I said. "Tell her we talked it over. Tell her I'll handle the paperwork." "She'll believe it," Cora said. "She'll want to believe it," I said. "That's better." Cora called Sabrina the next morning while I was reading the paper at the kitchen table. I listened to her side of the conversation. Her voice was warm and easy, the voice she uses with her former nursing colleagues when she runs into them at the supermarket, genuine, unhurried, giving nothing away. "Yeah, Mom talked to Dad," Cora said into the phone. "He's completely fine with it. He said he'll get the paperwork sorted out." A pause while Sabrina responded. "Of course. Take your time. No rush at all." She hung up and looked at me across the kitchen. "Done," she said. "Good," I said, and turned the page of the paper. That Monday morning, I drove to Karen Solis's office on Jamaica Avenue. The rubber plant by her window had grown another 6 inches since my last visit. Karen herself looked exactly as she always looked, steady, unhurried, like a woman who has heard every version of every financial problem and stopped being surprised by any of them sometime in the previous decade. I sat down across from her and told her what I needed. She picked up her pen. Everything, I said. Liquidate the full portfolio. I want the proceeds transferred to a new individual account at a separate institution. Nothing joint. My name only, new account number, new routing number. I folded my hands on the edge of her desk. And I want $32 left in the old account when it's done. Karen looked at me over the top of her glasses for a moment. It was the look she reserved for clients who were about to do something she had not seen before. That's a specific number," she said. "It is," I said. She wrote it down without asking why. That was one of the things I had always appreciated about Karen Solis. She understood that sometimes the reason belongs to the client. "There will be capital gains on the appreciated positions," she said. "The account has grown significantly since 2008. You're looking at a meaningful tax liability come April." "I know," I said. "Run it anyway. It'll take approximately 28 days for all the positions to settle and the transfers to clear," she said. "Federal settlement rules, equity sales take 2 business days per transaction, and with a portfolio this size, there will be multiple transactions staged across several weeks. You cannot accelerate that timeline." 28 days is fine," I said. Karen nodded and began typing. The sound of her keyboard was steady, and even like a machine running exactly as designed. Outside her window, Jamaica Avenue moved at its usual pace, the Q train rattling overhead, a delivery truck double-parked in front of the pharmacy across the street, 2 women arguing cheerfully about something outside the hair salon next door. The ordinary sound of a neighborhood that did not know or care that 30 years of careful work was being quietly relocated to safer ground. I drove home through streets I have known for most of my adult life. I passed the factory where I had spent 3 decades, the parking lot where I had eaten 1,000 lunches in my truck, the church where Cora and I had gotten married in 1997, its brick front unchanged, its steps just beginning to catch the October leaves. 28 days, I thought. 4 Sunday dinners. 4 evenings of pot roast and cloth napkins and Sabrina's careful smile across the table. I could manage 4 Sunday dinners. When I got home, Cora was in the kitchen starting soup. I hung up my jacket and washed my hands at the sink and told her it was done. "How long?" she asked. 28 days, I said. She stirred the pot without turning around. "I'll make sure the good placemats are clean. The longest month of my life did not happen at NYU Langone, when the orthopedic surgeon told me my lumbar spine had the profile of a man 20 years older. It did not happen in 2008 when I watched the investment account lose 31% of its value in 14 months, and had to make the daily decision not to touch it. The longest month of my life happened at my own kitchen table eating pot roast, watching my son browse real estate listings on his phone, while the money he was planning to spend on them was already gone. The first Sunday, after I met with Karen, Julian came downstairs with a legal pad. He had written a list of neighborhoods, Astoria, Woodside, Sunnyside, one entry for Long Island City with a question mark. He set it on the table beside his plate like an agenda item and talked through it with Sabrina in the half-included way that people talk when they want to be overheard. Sabrina had printed out 3 listings from a real estate website. She paper-clipped them together and set them next to the breadbasket. I passed the breadbasket to Cora and said the pot roast was excellent. The second Sunday, Julian asked me what I thought about the Woodside market, whether prices had stabilized since the pandemic run-up. I told him I had not been following it closely. He nodded and pulled up something on his phone and showed me a 3-bedroom on 58th Street with an asking price of $410,000 and a kitchen that had been renovated sometime in the previous decade. I looked at it for an appropriate amount of time and handed the phone back. "Not bad," I said. "We think it could work," Sabrina said. She was looking at me with that particular warmth she deployed when she wanted something, the warmth that had always reminded me of the reading on a gauge that has been manually adjusted to show a number the operator prefers. With the right support, it could really work. I said and reached for the salt. The third Sunday, I drove to the preschool on 37th Avenue where Willa had been teaching for 2 years. I did not go inside. I parked across the street and looked at the building for a while. A 2-story brick structure with a fenced yard on the side, painted handprints on the window glass. A sign above the door that had weathered to the point where you had to already know what it said to read it. The owner, a woman named Ruth Cavallo, who had run the school for 19 years, had been talking to a broker about selling since the spring. Her husband had retired to Florida, and she wanted to follow him. The broker had connected us in September before any of this, with Julian had come to a head, when I was still thinking about what to do with the account after Cora and I were gone. I called Ruth from the car. "I want to move forward," I told her. "Whatever the timeline needs to be." Ruth said she would call her attorney that week. Commercial property transfers in New York required title searches, environmental reviews, lease assignment if applicable, and a closing process that her attorney estimated at 60 to 90 days from signed purchase agreement. We had been in preliminary discussions since September. The paperwork was already in motion. "There's one condition," I said. "The current staff stays. All of them. Especially the lead teacher in the younger classroom." Ruth said she had always hoped the school would go to someone who cared about the kids more than the property value. I told her I did not care about it at all, which was the most honest thing I said to anyone that month. I drove home the long way through Jackson Heights, past the apartment building on 74th Street, where Willa rented a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor. Her light was on. It was a Thursday evening and she was probably grading something or planning a lesson or washing the green paint off her hands from whatever project her 4-year-olds had been working on that week. She had called Cora the previous Sunday from the grocery store just to talk the way she called every Sunday. She had asked how I was doing. Cora had said, "Fine, your father is fine, he's been going on his walks." Willa had said, "Tell him I said hi." She always said, "Tell him I said hi." And I always said, "Tell her I said hi back," and neither of us had ever thought to simply call each other directly, which was a failure of communication I intended to correct in a more permanent way than a phone message. The fourth Sunday, the last Sunday, before it was over. Julian came downstairs in the new shirt. Dark blue, expensive, the kind of shirt that announces an occasion without stating one. He had shaved more carefully than usual. Sabrina wore a dress I had not seen before. Cora had made pot roast. She had set out the good placemats. She had folded the cloth napkins into triangles beside each plate, pressed flat without a single wrinkle. She caught my eye when I came to the table and held it for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to the kitchen for the bread. I sat down and unfolded my napkin and placed it across my knee. Karen had called that Friday. The final transfers had cleared. The old account held $32.00. The new account, at a separate institution under my name alone, held the remainder minus transaction costs, and an amount Karen had set aside against the capital gains tax liability that would come due in April. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly where I had put it. Julian set his phone on the table beside his plate screen up and looked at me with the expression of a man who believes he is about to deliver good news. I picked up my tea. Outside on the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The furnace clicked on below us, steady and reliable. The house settled around its own warmth, the way old houses do, with a sound like a slow breath. 28 days, I thought. Done. I have some good news, Julian said, for the whole family. Before I tell you what that number actually meant, comment the number 32 below if you're still with me. I want to know you're here for this. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. If that's not for you, no hard feelings, you can step away right here. Julian's hand was still flat against the table when I set down my tea. The automated voice on the phone had read the number twice at his request, and both times it had said the same thing because automated systems do not adjust their answers based on how badly you need a different one. $32.00. He had lowered the phone slowly, the way a man lowers something heavy when his arms have stopped working properly. And now he stood at the edge of the table with his neck still red above that expensive collar, and his jaw set in a way I recognized from when he was 9 years old and had lost a Little League game he had been certain his team would win. "Sit down, Julian," I said. He did not sit down. His left hand pressed harder against the tablecloth, and the fabric bunched under his palm. Sabrina had pushed her plate to one side and was watching me with an expression I could not fully read. Not panic, not grief, something more calculated than either. Cora had folded her napkin beside her plate and folded her hands on top of it, and was looking at nothing in particular on the far wall, the way she looks when she is giving a situation room to breathe. $32, Julian said. His voice came out scraped and uneven. Out of 450,000. Dad, something happened. Someone got into the account. We need to call. Nobody got into anything. I said. Sit down. I'm not going to sit down until you tell me what, Julian. I said his name the way I used to say it on the plant floor when a younger technician was spiraling and needed to stop. Level, final, not a request. Sit down. He sat. His chair scraped hard against the tile, and he dropped into it with the controlled force of a man trying not to throw it. He put both hands on the table in front of him, palms down, fingers spread, and I could see the tendons working in the backs of his hands, pulling tight and releasing the way cables behave under load. $1. I said, for every year of your life. He stared at me. You are 32 years old, I said. That account held $32 when you called that number tonight, because I left $1 for each year I have been your father. 32 years of groceries and school supplies and insurance premiums and tuition payments and car keys and wedding receptions. I kept my voice even, I had been keeping my voice even for 32 years, and I was not going to stop now. Consider it the final line item. The account is closed, Julian. We are square. The silence that followed had a particular quality to it. The quality of a system that has just received a load it was not engineered to carry. Julian's mouth opened and closed. His hands pressed harder against the table. A muscle in his jaw jumped once-twice like something trying to find a way out. "You can't do that," he said. His voice had dropped low, and low was more dangerous than loud. I had always known that about Julian. That money, Dad, that was the family's money. That was— "Show me your name on the account," I said. He stopped. "Show me the statement where it says Julian Vance," I said. "Show me the form you signed when you opened it. Show me the contribution history with your deposits listed." I placed my hands flat on the table matching his. "You cannot show me any of those things because none of them exist. That was an individual brokerage account in my name alone. Under federal law and the laws of the state of New York, I am the sole account holder, and I require no one's permission or notification to manage, liquidate, or transfer any asset within it. No one's." Julian's face had gone from red to something paler and more dangerous. He pushed back from the table and grabbed his phone and dialed a number. Not the 800 number, this time a direct number punched in from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail again. "She's not answering," he said, and I understood he meant Karen, which meant he had gotten her direct number from somewhere, which was another detail I noted and filed. "It is Sunday evening," I said. "She will not answer on Sunday evening." "Then first thing tomorrow." "Call her," I said. "She will tell you exactly what I just told you. An individual account belongs to the individual. There is no legal mechanism by which you or Sabrina or anyone else in this family has any claim on what I chose to do with it." Julian stood up so fast his chair rocked behind him. His hands curled at his sides and his chest was heaving, and his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with anything good. "You planned this," he said. "You did this on purpose. You sat across from us at this table every Sunday for a month, and you knew you already knew." "Yes," I said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Julian flinched. He had not expected me to agree. "I knew," I said. "Your mother and I both knew. And we made a decision about what to do with that information." I looked at him steadily. "The same way you and Sabrina made a decision about what to do with mine the night you stood at my filing cabinet with your wife's phone." The color drained out of his face completely. His mouth closed. Across the table, Sabrina made a sound, small, involuntary, quickly controlled, and her hands went still on the tablecloth. Julian turned. He looked around the table the way a man looks around a room when the exits have all closed simultaneously. His eyes went to Sabrina. Sabrina looked at the table. His eyes went to Cora. Cora reached for her water glass, wrapped both hands around it, and looked at him with an expression that was not cold, and was not warm, and was not anything other than the face of a woman who has made up her mind. "Mom," Julian said. The word came out smaller than he intended. Younger. "Mom, say something." Cora did not say something. She set her water glass down. She unfolded her napkin, refolded it along its original crease, and placed it beside her plate with the careful deliberateness of a woman who has decided that the next thing she says will be worth the wait. Julian watched her do all of this with his hands gripping the back of his chair and his knuckles going white against the wood. Cora looked at her son. She held his gaze for a long moment, and in that moment I watched something move through Julian's face. Hope mostly, and beneath it the particular desperation of a man who has run out of ground and is looking for one solid thing to stand on. Then Cora picked up her fork and cut a small piece of pot roast and ate it. Julian's grip on the chair tightened until I could hear the wood protest faintly. He pulled in a breath through his nose, sharp and audible, and when he let it out, his shoulders dropped, and something shifted in his expression, from desperate to something colder and more reckless, the shift I had always dreaded seeing in him because it meant he had stopped thinking and started swinging. "Fine," he said. The word came out clipped and hard. "Fine. You want to play it like this." He straightened up and looked around the room the way a man looks around a room when he is trying to find his footing. "This is my house too. I have rights here. I've lived here, I've contributed." "Have you?" I said. He stopped. I stood up from the table. My back registered the movement the way it always does now, a slow complaint that starts at the lumbar and radiates outward, the permanent souvenir of 30 years on a plant floor. I walked to my office at the end of the hall. I knew exactly where the envelope was. I had put it there 4 months ago when I first understood where this was heading, and I had not moved it since because the thing about a tool you intend to use is that you keep it where you can reach it. I came back to the dining room with the envelope and set it on the table in front of Julian. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. "Open it," I said. He picked it up. His fingers were not entirely steady. I could see the slight tremor as he worked the flap open the way a man's hands tremble when his body knows something his mind is still refusing to accept. He pulled out the document inside and unfolded it and read, "The deed to the property at our address in Queens, New York. Recorded with the Queens County Clerk's Office in 2013, the year Cora and I made the final mortgage payment. Owner of record Gideon Ray Vance, sole owner." The property had been paid in full. There was no lien, no co-borrower, no secondary claimant of any kind. Julian's name did not appear on it anywhere. "The electricity bill," Julian said. His voice had gone flat. "You put my name on the electricity bill when you were 24 and needed to build your credit history," I said. "Having a utility account in your name at a stable address helped your credit score. That was the purpose. A utility account is not a deed, Julian. Your name on a Con Edison bill gives you the right to call them when the power goes out. Nothing else." He read the deed again. I watched him read it, watched his eyes move across the lines, stop back up, move forward again, the way eyes move when they are looking for an exit in a document that does not have one. His jaw was working. The tendons in his forearms were pulled taut against the skin. "You've been planning this for months," he said. Not an accusation this time. More like a man reading the instructions on something after it has already gone wrong. "Your mother and I have been protecting what we built," I said. "There is a difference." He dropped the deed on the table. It landed flat and slid slightly toward Sabrina, who stopped it with 2 fingers without looking up. She picked it up. She read it with the focused efficiency of someone who reads documents for information rather than emotion. And when she finished, she set it down and looked at Julian with an expression that told me she had already moved past this particular obstacle and was calculating the next one. "Hi, Julian," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth that had been its defining characteristic for the past 28 days was simply gone the way warmth leaves a surface when the heat source is removed. "Tell them about the business. Tell them what we were going to build with it. Tell them we had a real plan." Julian looked at her. Something passed between them that was not entirely comfortable. "We were going to open a consulting firm," he said. The words came out without conviction, like a speech being delivered after the audience has already left. Business development. I have the contacts, Sabrina has the marketing background. We had a whole structure worked out. You had a name picked out, Sabrina said. She was looking at me now, not Julian. We had a business plan. 3 years of projections. This wasn't about taking anything. It was about building something. I looked at Sabrina for a moment. She held my gaze without flinching, which I respected, even as I recognized it for what it was. Not honesty, but the performance of honesty, which is a different skill entirely, and one she had practiced considerably more than the other. Sabrina, I said. In 3 years under this roof, you have never once asked what it took to build what you were planning to redirect. Tonight is not the night to start talking about what you intended to build with it. I picked up the deed and slid it back into its envelope. And Julian, a business plan is not the same as a contribution. Wanting something is not the same as earning it. Sabrina's chin came up. Her eyes sharpened. She opened her mouth, and I watched her make the decision again not to say what she had been about to say. She was very good at that decision. I suspected she had been making it for years. I reached back into the envelope. There was one more piece of paper inside. I had hoped genuinely that I would not need to put it on this table. 4 months of hoping had not changed the fact that it was there. There is something else, I said. I have been carrying it since October. I want you to understand what it means before you say another word about plans. Before I show you the piece of paper that changed everything, the one Julian never knew existed, comment, I knew it. Or I didn't see that coming, below. Then stay, because what comes next is the part nobody expects. This story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. If you'd prefer something different, this is a good place to stop, no judgment at all. I had printed it in September, the week after we first walked through the property on 34th Avenue in Astoria. The broker had sent it by email, a summary sheet, 2 pages with the address at the top and the listing price below it, and 3 photographs of the interior attached. The kitchen with the new countertops. The living room with the bay window that caught the afternoon light. The backyard, small but private, with a wooden fence along the perimeter and a maple tree in the corner that had been there long enough to have grown taller than the fence by a considerable margin. I had printed it at the library on Northern Boulevard because our home printer had been out of ink since August, and I had not gotten around to replacing the cartridge. I had folded it twice and put it in my jacket pocket and carried it home on the Q44 bus. And when I got home, I had written 7 words in the upper right corner in my own handwriting and put it in the envelope with the deed. I pulled it out now and set it on the table. Julian looked at it. The photographs were face up: the kitchen, the living room, the backyard with the maple tree. His eyes moved across them slowly, the way eyes move when the brain is trying to understand what it is being shown before it has to understand what it means. He picked up the page and held it closer and read the address. His throat moved. Astoria, he said. 34th Avenue, I said. $420,000 asking price. We looked at it 3 times. Your mother liked the backyard. I paused. She took a photograph of the maple tree on the second visit because she thought you would want to see it. Cora reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed a photograph on the table beside the printed page. She had taken it on her phone and printed it at the same library on the same day I had printed the broker sheet, without telling me she had done it. The maple tree shot from the back steps of the house, its upper branches catching the September light in a way that made the leaves look almost gold. She had not shown it to me before tonight. I looked at the photograph for a moment. Then I looked at my wife, and she looked back at me. And neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that the photograph had not already said better. Julian was still holding the broker sheet. His hands had stopped trembling, They had gone very still instead, which was worse in my experience than trembling. Stillness in a structure under load means the load has exceeded the material's capacity to respond. "Turn it over," I said. He turned it over. On the back in the upper right corner in my handwriting, "For Julian. 33rd birthday." He read it. He read it again. I watched his face go through something I do not have precise language for. Not quite grief, not quite shock, something that moves through a person. The way a pressure wave moves through a structure, touching every load-bearing element on its way. His chin dropped slightly. His shoulders, which had been pulled back and tense for the past 40 minutes, let go of something they had been holding. "You were going to give us a house," he said. The sentence came out with no particular inflection, neither question nor statement, just words being placed in order while the mind catches up to what the mouth is saying. "We were going to give you a house," I said, "as a gift, for your 33rd birthday. Not because you asked for it, not because you found a way to take it, because your mother and I wanted you to have something solid, something yours, and we had spent 30 years making sure we were in a position to do that." My voice stayed level. I had promised myself it would stay level. "We had an appointment with the broker the morning after your mother found you and Sabrina in my office. I canceled it at 7:45 in the morning. I called from the kitchen while your mother was in the shower because I did not want her to have to hear me make that call." Julian set the page down on the table. He pressed it flat with the palm of his hand, smoothing it against the tablecloth. The way you smooth something you want to keep from curling at the edges. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were bright, and he was breathing very carefully, the slow, deliberate breathing of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, he is not going to fall apart at this table. I gave him a moment. It was the least I could do. "The morning your mother saw you with those papers," I said, "was the same morning I understood that the gift had already been canceled. Not by me, by you. By the decision you and Sabrina made to stand in my office and photograph my financial records, instead of knocking on the door and sitting down with me like a man and telling me what you needed." I kept my eyes on him. "I would have listened, Julian. I have always listened. That is the thing that will stay with me the longest about all of this. You never asked." Sabrina had not moved since Julian turned the page over. She was looking at the broker sheet, specifically at the photographs, the kitchen and the living room and the backyard, with the maple tree. And her expression had shifted into something I had not seen on her face before. Not calculation, not warmth. Something genuine which made it harder to look at than either of the others, because genuine regret in a person who has caused real damage is the most complicated thing in the world to sit across from at a dinner table. Julian looked up at me. His eyes were wet at the corners, and he was not going to let that go further, and I respected him for it, the same way I had always respected the moments when he held himself together at the times it cost him something to do it. He turned to his right, to Cora. "Mom," he said. He said it differently than he had said it before, not as a demand, not as a plea, but as the word itself. Just the word. The first word most of us learn, and the last one we stop needing. Cora stood up from the table. She picked up her plate and Julian's plate and carried them to the kitchen. She set them in the sink and turned on the water and stood with her back to the dining room for a moment, and her shoulders rose and fell once with a breath that I could see from where I was sitting. Then she turned off the water. She dried her hands on the dish towel by the sink. She turned around and looked at her son with the expression I had seen her use 30 years ago with the children in the pediatric ward, who needed someone to tell them the truth about something that was going to hurt. "I'm the one who told your father to sell it," she said. "Every last dollar. I'm the one who asked him to. Julian has called his mother Mom in that particular voice exactly 3 times in his adult life. Once, when he totaled the Civic on the Cross Island Parkway at 24 and called us from the shoulder of the road with broken glass in his hair. Once, when he lost his job in 2019 and called from the parking garage in Midtown with his voice barely holding its shape. And once tonight at this table with the broker sheet and the deed and 32 years of careful living spread out in front of him like an audit he had not known was coming. Each time Cora had answered. Each time she had been the first voice he heard. She answered now. She walked back from the kitchen and stood at the head of the table. Not her seat, not my seat. The head, the place. Nobody sat because it was where we put the extra chairs when we needed them for holidays. And she looked at her son with the expression I had seen her use in the pediatric ward when a child needed to hear something true, and she was the one who had been asked to say it. "I know," Julian said before she could speak, his voice fraying at the edges. "I know you're angry. I understand that. But Mom, if you had just talked to us, if you had just said something instead of all of this." "I saw you," Cora said. Julian stopped. "I came into your father's office to get the scissors," she said. "The good ones I keep in the top drawer for wrapping paper." You had his investment folder open on the desk, and Sabrina was photographing every page with her phone. Her voice did not shake. It had the quality of something that had been through the fire already and come out the other side with its shape intact. "You had your back to the door. Neither of you looked up." Julian's mouth opened. He pressed it closed again. His hands were flat on the table and his fingers had gone white at the tips, the blood pushed out by the pressure of his own grip. "Mom, we were just looking. You were photographing financial documents that did not belong to you," Cora said. "In a room you had not been invited into, with a plan you had not told us about." She pulled out the chair beside her and sat down slowly the way she sits when her hip has been bothering her and she does not want anyone to notice. "Julian, I have been your mother for 32 years. I know the difference between looking and planning." Julian's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped beneath his ear. He looked at me not for rescue, I could see that clearly, but for something to push against. Something to make the conversation move in a direction he could manage. "So that's it," he said, his voice dropping low and rough. "You both just decided, without telling us, without giving us a chance to explain or to talk or to—" "You did not give us a chance either," Cora said. "That is rather the point. So we needed help." The words came out stripped of everything, no performance, no strategy, just the bare fact of them. His voice cracked on the last word, and he pulled it back together with visible effort, his throat working. "Sabrina and I, we are drowning, Mom. The debt, the rent we can't afford, we didn't know how to ask. We didn't know how to say it outright, so we thought if we could just get access, if we could just get a start." "You thought if you could get access," Cora said, "before we knew what was happening." Julian did not answer. That was its own kind of answer. Cora leaned forward and placed her hand flat on the table between them, not reaching for him, not pulling back, just present the way she had placed her hand on the beds of sick children when there was nothing else to offer except the fact of being there. "I know you are struggling," she said. "I have known for 2 years. I watched it and I waited because your father and I believed you needed to find your own footing, and I am still not certain we were wrong about that." Her voice was very quiet now and very clear. "But Julian, we would have helped you. If you had sat down with us and told us the truth, we would have found a way. That is what parents do. That is what we have always done." She withdrew her hand. "What you chose to do instead was treat this family like a problem to be solved around, rather than people to be trusted with the truth. Sabrina pushed back from the table. The movement was small and controlled, but it was the first repositioning she had made in 20 minutes, and I tracked it the way I tracked any shift in a system under pressure. "Julian," Sabrina said. Her voice had gone flat and businesslike, the warmth entirely evacuated. "This isn't going anywhere." "Sabrina, there is nothing left to negotiate." She was looking at the table, rather than at any of us speaking, as though working through a problem in her own head that the rest of us happened to be present for. "The account is gone. The house was never ours. There is nothing here." Julian turned to look at her. Something crossed his face that I had not seen before. Not anger, not hurt, exactly more. The expression of a man who has just understood a thing he should have understood much earlier and is absorbing the cost of not having seen it sooner. "Sabrina," he said, and her name in his mouth had a different weight than it had carried an hour ago. She stood up from the table. She folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate with a neatness that struck me as the most honest thing she had done all evening. A person's real character shows in what they do with their hands when they have run out of moves. She looked at Julian for a moment. Then she looked at me. Then she walked toward the stairs. Her footsteps on the staircase were steady and even and deliberate. And from the dining room, we heard the door to the second-floor hallway open and close. And then from somewhere above us came a sound that was not quite silence. The specific sound of a room being efficiently assessed. Cora looked at her plate. Her pot roast had gone cold. She picked up her fork anyway. "There's pie on the counter," she said. "If anyone wants it." A woman packing a suitcase at 9:15 on a Sunday night makes a very specific sound. I have heard it once in my life, and I will not forget it. It is not the sound of someone who decided to leave. It is the sound of someone who had already decided some time ago, and was simply executing the final step of a plan that had been running quietly in the background the whole time. We heard it from the dining room. Julian sat at the table with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance, listening. Cora had finished her pot roast. She was working on the pie now methodically, the way she works through anything difficult, one small piece at a time without looking up. I counted the sounds. Dresser drawer. Closet door. The zip of a toiletry bag. The long drag of a main zipper pulled shut. Footsteps crossing the room twice, 3 times the deliberate back and forth of a person doing a final check. Nothing left behind that she intended to keep. Julian pushed back from the table. His chair caught on the tile, and he steadied it without looking at it, and walked to the foot of the stairs and stood there with one hand on the newel post, looking up. "The Sabrina," he called. No answer. More footsteps above. The particular thud of a full suitcase being lifted and set on its wheels. "Sabrina." His voice had lost its earlier edges. What was left was something younger and less certain, the voice of a man who is beginning to understand that some exits do not have a corresponding entrance. The suitcase appeared at the top of the stairs first. Then Sabrina, one hand on the handle, guiding it down step by step, with the practiced ease of someone who had moved often enough to know how to manage luggage on a staircase without assistance. She had changed out of the dress she had worn to dinner. She was in jeans and a gray pullover, and her coat was over her arm, and she had her phone in her free hand, with the screen lit, the Uber app open and counting down. 4 minutes. Julian stepped toward her at the bottom of the stairs. "You don't have to do this tonight. We can talk. We can figure out." "There is nothing to figure out, Julian." She said it without heat, without cruelty, with the flat precision of a woman reading a number off a gauge. "The account is gone. The house was never ours. I came here with a plan, and the plan is finished." She looked at him directly, and I will say this for Sabrina, she did not look away. I am sorry it went this way. I am genuinely sorry, but I am not sorry for trying. Julian's hand came up and touched her arm just above the elbow, the tentative grip of a man trying to stop something he can feel moving away from him. Sabrina, please. She looked at his hand on her arm. She did not pull away from it. She simply waited the way a person waits for something to finish, and after a moment, Julian let go. She walked past him to the front door. She lifted her coat from her arm and put it on one sleeve at a time, and picked up the suitcase handle and opened the door. The November air came in hard and cold, the specific cold of Queens in late autumn that has an edge to it, like something meant as a warning. The porch light was on. At the curb, the maple in the front yard had dropped most of its leaves, and they had collected in the gutter in a long, dark line. Sabrina stepped onto the porch. She stopped. She turned back and looked into the house, not at Julian, not at me, at the house itself. The hallway, the dining room beyond it, the kitchen light still on above the counter where Cora's pie sat half-eaten. She looked at it the way you look at something you are making a memory of, and I could not tell you even now what that look meant. I am not sure she could have told you either. Then her phone lit up in her hand. The Uber had arrived. She walked down the porch steps without looking back. The driver had pulled to the curb with his hazards on orange light, pulsing slow against the dark street. He got out and opened the trunk, and she handed him the suitcase and got into the back seat, and the door closed, and the trunk closed, and the car pulled out from the curb and moved down the street with its hazards still going for half a block before they stopped. Julian stood on the porch in his expensive shirt with his arms at his sides and watched the car reach the corner and turn and disappear. He stood there after it was gone. The street was empty and quiet, and the maple threw a thin shadow across the concrete under the porch light. I moved to the window of the living room and watched him from behind the glass. He was very still. The stillness of a man who has watched the last piece of a structure he had been leaning on for years finally finish falling and is now standing in the space where it used to be, taking stock of what is left. After 8 minutes, he came inside. He closed the front door behind him. He did not say anything to Cora or to me. He walked to the stairs and went up them slowly, one step at a time, and I heard his bedroom door close, and then the house was quiet. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, because there are kinds of pain a father cannot enter, and some he should not. What I could do was be awake and be downstairs, and let the house hold us all through whatever the night was going to ask of it. Cora came to stand beside me at the counter. She did not say anything. She got 2 cups from the cabinet and set them on the counter, and we waited for the kettle together. My son did not come downstairs for 14 hours. I know because I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning with a cup of tea that went cold. And then I went to bed and lay there listening to the house the way you listen to a machine that has been running rough, tracking every sound, waiting for the one that means something has changed. The furnace, a car outside, the refrigerator cycling on and off. Nothing from upstairs. Just the particular silence of a person lying still in a room, awake, not ready to move yet. Cora fell asleep sometime around midnight. Her breathing evened out beside me, and I was glad for it. One of us should sleep. At 8:40 in the morning, I heard Julian's door open. His footsteps crossed the hall, went down the stairs, past the kitchen without stopping. I was at the table with the paper and a fresh cup of coffee, and I watched him through the kitchen doorway as he went by, still in yesterday's clothes. His hair uneven on one side from the pillow, his face carrying the particular flatness of a man who has been awake most of the night, processing something too large to finish in one sitting. He did not go to the garage for any reason I could have predicted. He went, I think, because it was the one place in the house that had no memory of last night attached to it. No dinner table, no deed, no broker sheet, no chair he had shoved back hard enough to scrape the tile. Just the smell of motor oil and cold concrete and old tools, which is its own kind of quiet. I gave him 20 minutes. Then I brought my coffee to the door between the kitchen and the garage and stood there. He had found the box. It was on the workbench, the flaps folded back, and Julian was sitting on the stool I kept beside the bench, with the box open in front of him. He had the work gloves in his hands, the left one. He was holding it the way you hold something you are trying to read through your palms, rather than your eyes turning it over. Slowly his thumbs pressing into the leather at the center, where it had worn through to a shine from 30 years of gripping. He had not heard me at the door. I watched him set the glove down and reach into the box again. He came out with one of the amber prescription bottles, ibuprofen 800 milligram, the industrial dosage. The plant doctor had started prescribing around 2011 when my back began making itself a permanent part of my daily awareness. The bottle was empty. He turned it in his fingers and read the label and set it beside the glove. Then he reached in again and found another. And another. He lined them up on the workbench without counting them, though I had counted them when I packed the box, and there were 11. Then he found the pay stub, a paper envelope the kind the plant used before they switched to direct deposit in 2004. My name in the window. The week of March 14th, 1995. Gross pay $340. Federal withholding, state withholding, Social Security, Medicare, the standard deductions that turned a week of my life into a take-home figure of $281 and change. He unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold something old that you do not want to tear, and read it front and back. He put it down. He pressed both hands flat on the workbench and dropped his head between his shoulders, and held that position for a long moment, his back rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The kind of breathing a person does when they are working very hard to stay level. I had not moved from the doorway. He reached into the box one more time and found the photograph. I had forgotten it was in there. Cora must have put it in when she helped me pack the box after I retired. Julian, at 3 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the plant gate on a Saturday in the summer of 1996, when I had gone in for overtime and brought him along because Cora was at a nursing conference, and I had no other option. He was wearing a red t-shirt and holding my hard hat with both hands too big for his head tilted sideways. I was squinting against the sun. We were both grinning. Julian looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he reached into the box a final time and found the small envelope at the bottom. Different from everything else, not a work document, not a medical record. A letter-sized envelope unsealed with his name written on the front in my handwriting. Julian, for when you're ready. He turned it over, turned it back. His hands were not steady. He looked up for the first time and found me standing at the door, and neither of us spoke, and the garage held the silence between us, the way old spaces hold things without judgment, without hurry. I nodded once toward the kitchen. "Bring it inside," I said. "I'll make coffee." I wrote that letter the week Julian graduated high school. June of 2011. I rewrote it 4 times over 3 evenings at the kitchen table after Cora had gone to bed, crossing out sentences that sounded like speeches and replacing them with sentences that sounded like me, which took longer than I expected, because it turns out the distance between how a man speaks and how he actually feels is considerable, and bridging it on paper is harder than any mechanical problem I ever worked on. I never sent it. I told myself he was not ready. I told myself there would be a better time. There was not a better time, and here we were. Julian sat across from me at the kitchen table with the envelope in his hands. He had not opened it yet. He was looking at his name in my handwriting, the way he had looked at the photograph in the garage carefully, like something that required his full attention before he could decide what to do with it. "Open it," I said. He worked the flap open slowly. 2 pages folded in thirds, written on the lined paper I used for work notes because it was what I had at the time, and it did not occur to me to find something better. He unfolded them and read, "I am not going to tell you everything the letter said. Some of it belongs to him. What I will tell you is that I wrote about the plant and about what it meant to build something with your hands over a long time, and about the fact that I had never been good at saying the things I meant out loud, and that I was sorry for that, and that I hoped he would find work that used him well and people who deserved him. I wrote that the day he stopped needing me would be the day I knew I had done my job right. I wrote that I was still waiting for that day and that he should take his time." He read both pages. He turned back to the first page and read it again. His jaw was working and his eyes were bright, and he was doing the same thing he had done in the garage, breathing slowly and deliberately, managing himself from the inside. He set the pages on the table. "You wrote this in 2011, he said. "The week of your graduation." He looked at the pages for a moment. "Why didn't you give it to me?" "I thought you weren't ready," I said. "I'm not certain I was wrong." He absorbed that. Cora, who had been at the counter refilling her coffee, came and sat down at the table with us. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at Julian with the steady, unhurried attention she had given to sick children for 30 years present without pressing. "There's something else you should know," she said. Julian looked at her. "Mark your graduation day," she said. "The morning of. Your father received a notification from Kellerman. They were promoting him to shift supervisor. He had been waiting for that position for 6 years. She paused. He had to be at the plant by 8 o'clock to sign the paperwork and receive the formal offer. Julian turned to me slowly. "He drove you to the ceremony instead," Cora said. "He sat in the parking lot of the arena for 4 hours in June heat and waited for you to walk across that stage. He called the plant at 8:15 and told them he could not make it." Julian's voice came out stripped and quiet. "He never told me." "He didn't want you to feel like a burden," Cora said. "That was always his way. Carry it and don't mention it." Julian looked at me. His eyes were wet now, and he was not trying to stop it anymore, just letting it sit there, which cost him something, and I could see exactly what it cost. I got up and called Dennis from the kitchen phone. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does, because Dennis Pruitt has answered his phone on the second ring for as long as I have known him, which is going on 22 years. "I need you to bring the envelope," I said. "Give me 10 minutes, Dennis said. He was there in 8. He came through the back door, the way he always does, knocked once and let himself in, because that is the arrangement we have had since 2009 when Cora gave him a key after his wife passed, and we wanted him to know the door was open. He was carrying a small metal tin, the kind that had once held throat lozenges and now held something else, and he set it on the table and opened it and took out an envelope and placed it in front of Julian. Plain white envelope. Kellerman industrial letterhead in the upper left corner. Addressed to me. Dated June 14th, 2011. "Your father asked me to hold on to it," Dennis said. He pulled out a chair and sat down because Dennis does not stand when he can sit and does not complicate a sentence when a plain one will do. "Said he didn't want your mother finding it and feeling bad about it." He glanced at Cora. "No offense, Cora." "None taken," Cora said. Julian picked up the envelope and opened it. 1 page. The formal language of a company informing an employee that by failing to report on the designated date, the promotion offer had been rescinded. The position had been filled by another candidate. The company thanked him for his years of service. Julian read it twice. He set it beside my letter on the table, the 2 pages I had written for him, and the 1 page the company had written for me, side by side on the same kitchen table where he had signed his rent agreement 2 days later. "Dad," he said. His voice had no edges left. "I didn't know." "You were 18, I said. "It wasn't your job to know." Dennis looked between us with the patient expression of a man who has seen most of the things people can do to each other, and has made his peace with the fact that families are complicated. He reached over and put his hand briefly on Julian's shoulder, one firm press the way men offer comfort when they do not have the words for it, and then he stood up. "I'll see myself out," he said. He nodded to me. He nodded to Cora. He picked up his tin and went back through the door he had come in. Julian sat with both letters in front of him for a long time. "What do I do now?" he said. Not a question. Just words finding their way out of a man who had run out of other words. "That," I said, "is the first honest thing you've asked me in years. There are 2 kinds of children in every family. The ones who ask what they are owed, and the ones who never think to ask." Willa had been teaching at Sunrise Learning on 37th Avenue for 2 years, when I first spoke to Ruth Cavallo about buying it. Ruth had built the school from 11 students in a rented church basement in 2004 to 63 students in a proper building with a fenced yard and painted handprints on every window. Her husband had retired to Sarasota in the spring, and she wanted to follow him. She had been talking to a broker since March. I called her in September before any of this, with Julian had come to a head when I was still thinking clearly about the future, rather than the present. We met twice. The second time I told her my condition. "The staff stays," I said. "All of them, especially the lead teacher in the younger classroom." Ruth looked at me over her reading glasses. "You know Willa." "She's my daughter," I said. Ruth set down her pen. "I always hoped it would go to someone who cared more about the children than the property." She looked at the window at the yard outside, where a teacher was helping 3 small children navigate the climbing structure with focused patience. "I think we can work something out." We worked it out. The closing took 61 days. Karen Solis managed the transfer of funds and reminded me gently but firmly that I would need to file a gift tax return with the IRS in April Form 709 reporting the transfer to Willa as a taxable gift. Though given my lifetime exemption, the actual tax liability would be negligible. I told her to add it to the list. She said she would. The paperwork was complete the 2nd week of November. I called Willa on a Wednesday and told her I needed her to sign some insurance documents at a lawyer's office on Queens Boulevard. She said she could come Thursday after school. I told her that was fine. She walked into the conference room at 4:15 with green paint on her left wrist and a canvas tote bag over her shoulder, and the expression of a person who has agreed to run an errand and is prepared to be done with it in 20 minutes. She stopped when she saw Cora. She stopped again when she saw Karen. She looked at Ruth Cavallo and her expression shifted into something uncertain. "Dad," she said, "what is this?" "Sit down, Willa." She sat. The lawyer slid the document across the table to her. She read the title. Read it again. Her hand came up and pressed flat against her sternum against the front of her jacket, the way a person presses against something to make sure it is still there. "I don't understand," she said. "It's yours," I said. "Has been for 3 weeks. We needed the ink to dry on a few things first. Dad." Her voice had gone very small. This is where I work. It's where you work, and it's where you own, I said. Those are the same place now. She looked at Cora. Cora reached across the table and covered Willa's hand with hers, and did not say anything, because Cora understood that this was not a moment that needed words added to it. Willa's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together hard, trying to hold it, and then she stopped trying and let it happen, and her shoulders dropped with the release of it, and she bent forward over the table with both hands covering her face, her whole body shaking with the kind of crying that has no performance in it whatsoever. I am not good with tears. I never have been. I got up from my chair and walked around the table and put my hand on her back between her shoulder blades and kept it there. It was the most I knew how to do, and I hoped it was enough. After a while, she straightened up. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint green smear on her cheekbone from the paint she had not quite cleaned off, and looked at me with red eyes and said, "Why?" "Because you never asked for anything," I said. "Because your grandmother left money that was meant to matter, and I wanted it to go somewhere it would. Because you count every penny, and you show up every day, and you get green paint on your hands, and you don't complain about any of it." I put my hand briefly on top of hers. "Make sure you still have some left, Willa. That's all I ask." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the document on the table. She picked up the pen. Karen reminded her gently that she should read it first. Willa said she trusted us. Karen said that was kind, but she should still read it. Willa read it. Then she signed it all 4 pages with her full name on each one, Willa Ann Vance. Outside the conference room window, Queens Boulevard moved at its usual indifferent pace. I watched a city bus go by and thought about Ruth Cavallo's climbing structure in the yard on 37th Avenue, and 63 children who would come back on Monday morning, to the same teachers they had said goodbye to on Friday, and not know that anything had changed. On the drive home, I stopped in front of the school. Willa sat in the back seat and looked at the building through the window, the painted handprints, the sign above the door, the lights still on in the front classroom where the afternoon aide was stacking chairs. "That's my classroom," she said quietly. "It's your school now," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Does Julian know?" "Not yet," I said. "He will. When he's ready." Julian found out about Willa's school on a Wednesday. I know because Willa called her mother that evening the way she calls every Sunday, and apparently now Wednesdays as well, and I heard Cora's side of the conversation from the living room. Warm, careful, the specific warmth of a woman sharing good news with someone she loves while being aware that the walls of the house are thin and the news is not simple for everyone inside them. Julian was upstairs. Whether he heard, I do not know. He did not come down. He sat with it for 2 days. 2 full days, which was the longest I had ever known Julian Vance to sit with anything uncomfortable, without either demanding a conversation or leaving the room. On Friday evening, he came into the kitchen while I was reading and pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. He looked different. Not better exactly. Quieter. The way a machine looks after it has been running rough for a long time, and something has finally worked itself loose and fallen away. "Willa didn't know," he said. "Did she?" "Not until Thursday." He nodded slowly. His hands were on the table in front of him, relaxed for the first time in days. "She called Mom last night. I could hear her from upstairs." A pause. She sounded happy. She was happy. "Good," Julian said. He said it without irony, without the edge I had been braced for. Just the word sitting flat and honest on the table between us. "That's good." I looked at my son for a moment. Something had shifted in him in the past 4 days. Not fixed, not resolved, but shifted. The way a load redistributes when a structure finally settles into its actual foundation, rather than the one it had been pretending to stand on. "See, I asked for everything," he said. Not a question, not a confession. Just a man reading a number off a gauge and accepting what it said. My whole life, I just had my hand out and waited. I did not confirm it, and I did not deny it. It was his accounting, to do not mine. "What happens now?" he said. I reached under the table and picked up the folder I had placed there before he came down. I had prepared it that afternoon, printed and signed on my end, 2 copies clipped together. I set it on the table in front of him. He opened it, read the first page. His eyes moved steadily down the terms. $800 per month, due the first of each month payment by check or bank transfer. Tenant responsible for personal utilities. Month-to-month tenancy, 30 days written notice required from either party to terminate. Standard lease language, nothing unusual, the kind of agreement 2 people sign when they intend to be straightforward with each other. $800, he said. "So market rate for a room in this neighborhood," I said. I checked. "I know," he said. I looked it up too. He turned to the second page, read the signature lines. "You'd really do this?" "I already did it," I said. "I'm offering you the chance to sign it, which is different from how things have usually worked between us." He looked up at me. "Oh, you could find somewhere else," I said. "There is no obligation. But if you stay, you pay. And if you pay, it's yours in the way that things are only yours when you've paid for them." I folded my hands on the table. "That is the only kind of ownership that means anything, Julian. I spent 30 years learning that." He looked at the lease for a long moment. Then he picked up the pen I had left in the folder. "Oh, I start at the logistics company Monday," he said. "Night shift. It's not what I was doing before." "Is it honest work?" He looked at me. "Yes." "Then it's a start," I said. He signed both copies. His signature was smaller than I expected, less flourish than usual, the signature of a man who was writing his name on something real and felt the weight of it accordingly. He slid one copy across to me and kept the other. I took it and set it in the folder and closed the folder and put it back under my chair. And we sat there for a moment in the kitchen that had held 32 years of our lives. The school permission slips and the college applications and the Sunday dinners and all the rest of it. And neither of us felt the need to say anything about that. "Dad," Julian said. He was looking at the table. "That promotion in 2011. He looked up. "Do you regret it?" I looked at my son, 32 years old, sitting in the kitchen where he had eaten breakfast for most of his life, with a signed lease in his hand and a night shift starting Monday, and the specific expression of a man who is finally asking a real question and is prepared for a real answer. "Ask me again in 10 months, I said. "When you've got something worth regretting for." He held my gaze for a moment. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, too tired for that, but the shape of one. The first shape of one I had seen in 4 days. He got up and took his copy of the lease and went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Outside the window, the street was quiet. The November dark settled in early, the way it does in Queens. The porch light on at Dennis's house across the way. A yellow square of warmth in all that dark. 10 months, I thought. We would see. 10 months is long enough for a man to learn that rent does not pay itself. It is long enough to find out what he is made of when nobody is making it easy. Long enough to discover that a night shift at a logistics warehouse on the Van Wyck is not glamorous, and is not temporary, and is not a step down from something better. It is simply the work And the work is what you show up for, and showing up is the whole of it. Julian paid $800 on the first of every month. By check as agreed, slid under my bedroom door the night before, because he left for work before I was up. For the first 3 months, the checks arrived with the careful punctuality of a man who is proving something. After that, they arrived with the casual punctuality of a man who has stopped needing to prove it. There is a difference, and I noticed it. In April, he filed his own taxes for the first time. He sat at the kitchen table with his W-2 and a laptop and did not ask me for help. He got a refund of $211, which he put directly into a savings account he had opened in February. The account held $400 by the time summer arrived. He did not mention it. Cora told me. The divorce finalized in September. New York equitable distribution, no shared assets of significance, no children. It was as clean as these things can be, which is to say it was not clean at all, but it was finished. Julian did not talk about it. I did not ask. Some processes need to run their course without commentary. Willa hired an assistant director for the school in October. A woman named Patricia, who had 15 years in early childhood education, and according to Willa, an organizational system that made the previous filing cabinet look like a yard sale. Sunrise Learning had its best enrollment quarter since 2019. Willa called on Sunday to report this the way she reported everything now, with the quiet satisfaction of a person doing work that is entirely her own. I framed the account statement in November. Karen had sent the final record when the old account was officially closed, 1 page. Gideon Ray Vance account, balance $32.00. I had it matted in a simple black frame and hung it on the wall of the living room beside a photograph of my mother-in-law, Martha, taken sometime in the early 1980s, standing at her ironing board, looking at the camera with the expression of a woman who has no patience for being photographed when there is work to be done. I thought she would have liked the pairing. Christmas this year was a Thursday. Willa arrived first with a bottle of wine and a bag of clementines and green paint on her right hand, from a craft project her kids had completed that week. Reindeer, she said, though they looked more like dogs if you were being honest about it, which she was. She kissed Cora on the cheek and looked around the living room and saw the frame on the wall and stood in front of it for a moment, without saying anything. Then she looked at me and smiled. Julian arrived 40 minutes later. He was still in his work jacket, the dark blue one with the company logo on the chest, that he had bought in October and wore without apparent self-consciousness, which was a change I had noticed and did not comment on. He was carrying a white bakery box, the kind with the string tied around it. He set it on the kitchen counter. "I brought a cake," he said. "From that place on Jamaica Avenue. The one with the Italian cookies in the window." "You didn't have to do that," Cora said. "I know," Julian said. "I wanted to." He meant it. I could hear that he meant it, which was different from the many times in his life he had said similar things, and meant something adjacent to it, but not quite the same. He came into the living room. He saw the frame on the wall. He stood in front of it the way Willa had, reading it, both the document and the fact of it being there on the wall in a frame in the room where we had eaten 32 years of Sunday dinners. "You framed it," he said. "Seemed right," I said. He looked at it for a long moment. I watched him look at it, at his name in the account number, at the balance, at the date, at the whole quiet fact of it. Then we sat down to dinner. The 4 of us around the table with the good placemats and the cloth napkins folded into triangles, the way Cora folds them when she wants the evening to feel deliberate. The food was good. The wine was good. Willa talked about the reindeer that looked like dogs. Julian talked about a co-worker who had taught him to operate the warehouse forklift, which he described with more enthusiasm than I had heard from him about anything in years. Cora looked at me across the table at one point, the same way she had looked at me 10 months ago across the same surface and held it for 1 second. I understood what it meant. I looked back, and I hoped she understood what I meant too. After dinner, Julian helped clear the table without being asked. He and Willa washed the dishes together at the sink, his voice low and her laugh carrying back into the dining room where Cora and I sat with our coffee. And it was the most ordinary sound in the world. And I sat there and let it be ordinary. Julian came back in and sat down and looked at me. "You asked me to ask again in 10 months, he said. "About the regret." "I remember." "Do you," he said, "regret it?" I looked around the table. Cora with her coffee, Willa with her clementine, Julian with his hands resting easy on the table in front of him. No grip, no tension, just resting. I looked at the frame on the wall, Martha beside it in her photograph looking back at me with that expression that had no patience for delay. "I regret it took this long," I said. "That's all I regret." Julian nodded slowly. He did not say anything else, and neither did I, and it was enough. I looked down at my hands on the table. The hands of a 60-year-old man who had spent 30 years building things machines mostly. Pipes and drives and pressure systems and components that kept the heat running in buildings full of people who never thought about where the heat came from. And one man. Built slowly, imprecisely, with tools I was not always sure I was using correctly. Rebuilt more accurately in the last 10 months by his own hand with his own materials. The best repairs always cost more than the estimate. I had known that since my first year on the floor. I picked up my coffee and drank it while it was still warm. I am not a man who gives speeches. I fix things. That is what I know how to do. But if I have learned anything from the year this story covers, it is this: family justice does not come from anger. It does not come from revenge. It comes from the quiet decision to stop absorbing consequences that belong to someone else, and to let the people you love meet the weight of their own choices. That is not cruelty. That is the most honest form of love I know. I believe God puts certain moments in front of us, not to punish us, but to correct our course. This was mine. If you are the one who always pays, always smooths, always absorbs, do not wait 32 years the way I did. The people at your table will not value what costs them nothing. I know this now. I wish I had known it sooner. These are the dad's revenge stories nobody tells at dinner, quiet, legal, and built one careful decision at a time. I am not proud of everything that led here, but I am not ashamed of where it ended. If this story sat with you, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment you felt the most. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The next story is already waiting. These stories contain fictional elements created for the purpose of exploring real human experiences. If this one wasn't for you, no hard feelings, find what speaks to you. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. This has been Family Justice told $1 at a time.